For decades, the Karakoram Range was a wall of stone over 7,000 meters high, separating two ancient civilizations. To cross it on foot took months, over passes where the air is too thin to breathe, through valleys choked by avalanches. Then a plan emerged. Carve a highway through the very heart of this death zone, a road that would be the highest paved international route on Earth, climbing to 700 meters, spanning more than 300 kilometers. The cost? Not just billions of dollars, but thousands of lives. This is how they built the Karakoram Highway, the most dangerous road ever constructed by human hands. Stage 1 began not with a bulldozer, but with a pencil. Surveyors had to map a path through terrain that had never been measured. They rappelled down cliffs with nothing but rope and a theodolite, recording rock angles and chasm depths meters at a time. Helicopters were not an option. At these altitudes, roaders struggle for lift. So teams walked for weeks, carrying instruments on their backs, sleeping in crevices. They found that the only viable corridor was the ancient Silk Road route, a thin ribbon of riverbeds and sheer gorges carved by the Indus and its tributaries. But that corridor was littered with obstacles: granite walls rising straight from the water, unstable scree slopes, and glaciers that advanced and retreated like frozen tides. The surveyors marked a line that, on paper, seemed impossible, a road that would require 200 major bridges and over 3,000 culverts. Yet before a single shovel could touch the earth, they had to solve the first riddle: how to bring heavy machinery into a place where no road existed. Stage 2 answered that riddle with brute force. They didn't build the road from the outside in, they built it from the inside out, using the riverbeds as natural access. Pakistani and Chinese crews, often working side by side, began with what they called the Pioneer Track, a dirt path wide enough for a single jeep, bulldozed over boulders and through avalanche debris. From that fragile thread, they launched the real assault. Dynamite was the primary tool. Hundreds of tons of explosives were hauled in by teams of porters and mules across rock slides. Then came the jackhammers, powered by generators that had to be helicoptered in pieces and reassembled on ledges. Workers dangled from ropes, drilling blast holes into vertical cliffs. A single blast could remove 20,000 cubic meters of rock, but it could also trigger a massive landslide that wiped out a month of progress. The challenge was precision. They needed to carve a bench into the cliff face, wide enough for 2 lanes, without collapsing the entire mountainside. They drilled patterns, delayed blasts in sequences, and after each explosion, men with scaling bars climbed down to pry loose boulders by hand. For every kilometer of road, they had to move an average of 50,000 cubic meters of material, enough to fill 20 Olympic swimming pools. But before they could pave a single meter, they had to cross the most terrifying gaps: the deep, river-fed gorges. Stage 3 focused on foundations. The Karakoram Highway isn't a single ribbon of asphalt. It's a chain of bridges and retaining walls, each one anchored into living rock. But the rock is rarely solid. The Karakoram is part of the colliding Indian and Eurasian plates, meaning the ground shifts, creaks, and crumbles. Engineers faced a nightmare: how to set a concrete foundation on a slope that moves every time the earth breathes. They solved it by going deep. Teams drilled boreholes 20 meters into the mountainside, then pumped in grout under high pressure to fill every crack. They built gravity-retaining walls, massive trapezoids of stone and concrete, some as high as 30 meters, that lean into the slope and hold it back. Each wall required thousands of tons of aggregate, which had to be crushed on-site using portable rock crushers fed by hand-sorted boulders. The concrete itself was a battle. At high altitude, water boils at a lower temperature, slowing the curing process and weakening the mix. Engineers added special accelerants and covered fresh concrete with tarpaulins to trap heat. In winter, they built fires under the forms to keep the concrete from freezing. But even with perfect foundations, the road still had to cross chasms where the river roared 200 meters below. And for that, they needed bridges. Bridges that could withstand the planet's most violent seismic activity. Stage 4 was the era of the bridge builders. The Karakoram Highway features over 200 major bridges, and not a single one is a simple concrete slab. They designed suspension bridges with main cables anchored directly into cliff faces, and arch bridges with steel ribs that were erected without scaffolding, each piece lifted by a single crane or even by manual winches. The most famous is the Hunza River Bridge, a suspension span that replaced an earlier, terrifying rope and plank crossing. To build it, Workers first had to string a light cable across the ravine using a rocket-launched line. That cable pulled a heavier rope, which then pulled a steel cable, and finally, the main suspension cable, a strand of galvanized wire 5 centimeters thick. But the real challenge was the deck. They couldn't cast it in place over the void, so they prefabricated steel sections on the riverbank, and then hoisted them into position, one by one, with a temporary cableway. Each section weighed 20 tons and had to be bolted in place by workers standing on a narrow catwalk that swayed in the wind 150 meters above the water. The wind was constant. Funneled by the gorge, it could gust to 100 kilometers per hour, turning the catwalk into a pendulum. Workers wore safety lines tied to the main cable, but if a section swung too hard, it could crush them against the steel. One mistake, and a 20-ton slab would plummet into the river. Yet they installed 40 sections in 3 months. The finished bridge, a graceful arc of steel and concrete, could carry 60-ton trucks. But the bridges were only islands of safety. The road between them was still a death trap of loose rock. Stage 5 was about taming that road, paving it into a permanent surface. The Karakoram Highway is mostly asphalt, but asphalt doesn't stick to shifting scree. So they first had to build a sub-base of crushed stone, laid in layers and compacted by heavy rollers that were themselves brought up piece by piece. But the real innovation was in the drainage. Water is the highway's worst enemy. Rain and snowmelt seep into cracks, freeze at night, expand, and shatter the road surface. Engineers installed what they called relief drains, pipes embedded in the slope that divert water away from the pavement. They also built hundreds of catch walls, low concrete barriers that stop falling rocks, but not avalanches. For those, they designed snow sheds, concrete tunnels built over the road that slope at 45 degrees so that snow slides off and lands in the valley below. These sheds are not simple boxes. They are reinforced with steel beams anchored into the mountain, and each one took months to construct. Workers poured concrete in freezing conditions, using heated forms and insulated blankets. The longest snow shed stretches for over 200 meters, a dark tunnel that feels like driving through a mountain's guts. But even with all this engineering, the road remained vulnerable. And before they could declare it open, they had to test it. And that test came with the first convoy. Stage 6 was the trial by fire. In 1978, after 12 years of construction, and an estimated 900 to 5,000 worker deaths, the exact number remains disputed, the Karakoram Highway was finished. Or so they thought. The first official convoy was a mix of Pakistani and Chinese military trucks, loaded with supplies and dignitaries. But as they drove from the Chinese border town of Kashgar toward the Pakistani city of Gilgit, they encountered a problem no amount of concrete could solve. The road was already falling apart. A landslide had buried one section under 10 meters of debris, a bridge approach had cracked from seismic tremors, and a glacier had advanced, pushing the river against a retaining wall, threatening to undermine the entire route. The convoy was stopped for days while workers with shovels and dynamite cleared the slide. This was the reality. The Karakoram Highway is never truly finished. It requires constant maintenance, constant reconstruction. That first convoy reached its destination, but the road they traveled was not the smooth, modern highway of tourism brochures. It was a rough, unpaved track in many places, with sheer drops and no guardrails. The official opening was held on June 18, 1978, at the Khunjerab Pass, 700 meters above sea level. A Chinese delegation and the Pakistani president shook hands in the snow, but the road was far from complete. Stage 7, the final and ongoing chapter, is the continuous upgrade. For decades, the Karakoram Highway remained a gravel-like track, often closed for months due to avalanches and landslides. In the 2000s, a massive renovation began, the Karakoram Highway Phase 2, widening the road, paving it with modern asphalt, and adding dozens of new bridges and tunnels. The most critical addition, the tunnels that bypass the most dangerous avalanche paths. One of them, the 5-kilometer-long Mount Godwin-Austin Tunnel, named after K2's original surveyor, cuts directly through a ridge that had killed dozens of drivers. But building a tunnel at 400 or 500 meters is a feat of its own. The rock is brittle, the oxygen is low, and the drill bits break every hour. Chinese and Pakistani engineers used a tunnel boring machine, but it jammed twice and had to be manually freed. Today, the Karakoram Highway is a paved, all-weather road for most of its length. But it remains the most dangerous paved road on Earth, not because of poor engineering, but because of the geography it defies. The climax came not with a ribbon cutting, but with a single moment that sums up the entire project. In 2015, a truck driver named Muhammad Khan became the first person to drive the full length of the Karakoram Highway from Islamabad to Kashgar in a single journey. 300 kilometers, 22 hours, through ice, mist, and rockfall. He emerged on the Chinese side with his arms trembling. "The road fights you," he said. "Every meter is a war." That war is still being fought. The Karakoram Highway now carries over 10,000 vehicles a day, connecting two of the world's largest economies. It is part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a trade route worth $60 billion. But the mountains never stop moving. Avalanches bury entire sections every winter. Landslides carve new chasms each spring. The highway requires a permanent army of engineers and workers, men who live in tents at 4,000 meters, who repair the same stretch of road year after year, who know that a single boulder the size of a car can end a life in an instant. They are the descendants of the original builders, carrying on a tradition of impossible work. The Karakoram Highway is not just a road. It is a line of defiance drawn across the roof of the world. It exists because thousands of men held jackhammers against granite, poured concrete in blizzards, and walked across swaying cables over rivers that have no mercy. The road is a monument to human stubbornness, a scar on the planet that proves we will go anywhere, build anything, no matter the cost. And as the glaciers recede, and the tectonic plates continue to grind, that road will keep changing, keep challenging. But it will never disappear. Because once you carve a path through the Karakoram, you do not close it. You fight for it, kilometer by kilometer, for as long as the mountains stand.